For decades, ECOWAS stood as the bedrock of West African unity, a regional alliance backed by the West and envisioned as a path toward collective prosperity. But that once solid pillar has now crumbled. In a historic and defiant move, 3 nations have severed ties, not with a former colonial master, but with the very institution created to unite them. This is no minor disagreement. It's an outright rebellion, a declaration that for these nations, the age of external dominance in West Africa has ended. The first domino has fallen, and the rest may soon follow. What we are witnessing is not just a political shakeup, but a deep fracture in a 50-year-old institution, the Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS. Born from the Pan-African dream of solidarity and strength, it now finds itself weakened and divided. In January 2025, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger officially walked away, and they didn't slip out quietly. They left with a roar, framing their exit as an act of sovereignty and a rejection of what they saw as a foreign-controlled system. This is the story of that rejection, how a vision of regional integration transformed, in the eyes of millions, into a symbol of external manipulation. These are nations grappling with relentless terrorism, deep economic challenges, and questions of identity, who decided the cost of belonging to this club was too high. They saw ECOWAS not as a protector, but as a puppet controlled from Paris and Washington. We will trace the path of this rupture, from the promise ECOWAS once held, to the missteps that eroded trust, and finally to the dramatic break that has redrawn the political map of Africa. For these nations, the struggle was about survival. Their enemy was not only the extremist groups tearing through the Sahel, but also the very organization meant to be their ally. Their answer was bold: to unite under a new banner, the Alliance of Sahel States. To grasp the magnitude of this collapse, we must return to 1975. In the wake of independence movements, Africa was still haunted by the shadows of colonialism. Newly sovereign nations sought stability and collective strength. The Treaty of Lagos brought together 15 states, both English and French-speaking, in a vision inspired by Europe's economic community, but with a distinctly African character. It wasn't just about trade, it was about forging a shared identity. Citizens were to move freely across borders without visas, and ambitious plans were set for a single currency, unified economic policies, and large-scale projects to bind the region together. In its early years, ECOWAS played a vital role. It mediated in wars, restored peace in Liberia and Sierra Leone, and promoted democratic governance. But even at its peak, critics whispered that it had become a president's club, more interested in protecting leaders than serving ordinary citizens. Rules on democracy were selectively enforced. Coups were condemned, but leaders manipulating constitutions to extend their rule often escaped scrutiny. Over time, these inconsistencies bred cynicism. Economic promises also rang hollow for many. While connected elites benefited from cross-border trade, people in landlocked nations like Mali and Niger saw little change in daily life. The long-promised single currency never materialized, and many countries remained tied to the CFA franc, a colonial-era currency linked to the French treasury, seen by many as a symbol of ongoing economic dependence. As years passed, cracks widened. The Sahel became the epicenter of a security crisis in the 2010s. As extremist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS took root, governments struggled to respond, and ECOWAS faltered. Instead of strong African-led solutions, the bloc leaned heavily on outside military assistance, especially from France. While foreign troops offered immediate firepower, their presence fueled resentment and a perception that Africa could not secure itself. Without Western help, for the people of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, the security situation worsened. Villages were burned, schools shut down, and vast territories fell outside state control. ECOWAS, in their eyes, seemed more focused on high-level meetings than on stopping the violence. This growing frustration paved the way for military takeovers. Mali in 2020 and 2021, Burkina Faso in 2022, and Niger in 2023. Unlike in the past, These coups were celebrated by huge crowds waving national and even Russian flags, signaling a desire for new alliances. Military leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Colonel Assimi Goïta, and General Abdourahmane Chiani became symbols of defiance and national pride, promising to succeed where civilian governments and ECOWAS had failed. For ECOWAS, these coups were a direct challenge to its core principles. The bloc could have adapted, addressing the root causes of instability, but instead chose punitive measures. The harshest came after the Niger coup in 2023. Unprecedented sanctions that shut borders, froze state assets, restricted trade, and even threatened electricity supplies from Nigeria. These measures devastated ordinary citizens, sending food and medicine prices soaring. Many saw the sanctions not as a defense of democracy, but as punishment for resisting Western influence. With France accused of pulling strings, the threat of military intervention against Niger shocked the region further, cementing ECOWAS's image as a tool of external powers willing to use African soldiers against their own neighbors. In the eyes of millions, the break was inevitable. ECOWAS, once a symbol of unity, had become the face of a system they no longer trusted. And so, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger walked away, not into isolation, but into a new alliance, determined to chart their own future. This hardline approach exposed what many saw as a deep hypocrisy. Where was this same uncompromising stance when other West African leaders rewrote constitutions to cling to power? Where were the crushing sanctions for sham elections or for governments silencing dissent? The selective enforcement of democratic principles spoke volumes. To critics, it confirmed a long-standing belief: ECOWAS was not truly a community of equals, but rather a protective club for sitting presidents. Leaders could govern however they wished, so long as they weren't overthrown. But for those who seized power, even with mass public support, the punishment was immediate and severe. Instead of isolating the military juntas in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, these sanctions had the opposite effect. They rallied their populations behind them, inflaming anti-ECOWAS and anti-French sentiment. The three nations now shared more than just similar circumstances. They had a common adversary and a common cause. The blockade meant to weaken them, instead bound them together, forging the beginnings of a determined alliance. For these nations, the point of no return arrived in September 2023. As ECOWAS threatened military intervention in Niger, the three states responded, not with surrender, but with unity. They signed the Liptako-Gourma Charter, officially forming the Alliance of Sahel States, AES. This was not symbolic posturing. It was a mutual defense pact. Its message was clear: an attack on one member would be treated as an attack on all, triggering collective military support. In effect, they had built a new regional security bloc, warning ECOWAS and the world: if you fight one of us, you fight all of us. The creation of the AES sent shockwaves across the continent. It marked the rise of a rival power center in the heart of West Africa, united by both a shared security crisis and a rejection of the old political order. The juntas had effectively called ECOWAS's bluff. Any invasion now meant a full-scale regional war, a cost no one was willing to bear. With their defense guaranteed by their own pact, the next step was inevitable. On January 28, 2024, in a joint televised statement, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger announced their immediate withdrawal from ECOWAS. Their declaration accused the bloc of abandoning the ideals of its founders and falling under foreign influence. The sanctions were labeled as inhumane and as a betrayal of West African solidarity. Under ECOWAS rules, withdrawals require a one-year notice, and so the departure became official on January 29, 2025. A last-minute offer for a 6-month transition period was rejected outright. For the AES, the decision was final. This was more than an administrative separation. It was a symbolic severing of the chains of what they saw as a post-colonial system. The move shook ECOWAS headquarters in Abuja. The bloc was losing over 2.7 million square kilometers of territory and a combined population of more than 71 million people. Though most ECOWAS institutions were based in Nigeria and Ghana, the political and symbolic loss was enormous. the prestige of the organization took a severe blow. As a statement of their new direction, the AES began issuing their own biometric passports under the alliance's branding. The road ahead promised hardship, but it would be one they charted themselves. No longer would they play supporting roles in a story written elsewhere. They would be the authors. Leaving ECOWAS was only the first step. The next was reorienting their international alliances. That began with expelling the last Western military forces. For years, French and American troops had been at the forefront of counterterrorism in the Sahel, but the juntas and their supporters saw them as symbols of failed strategies and compromised sovereignty. French ambassadors were expelled, military bases shut down, and the tricolor flag removed, closing a long chapter of foreign military presence. Into the vacuum stepped Russia. The AES leadership made highly public overtures to Moscow, visiting regularly to secure new security partnerships. The Wagner Group's operations in the region were formally absorbed into Russia's Ministry of Defense, under a new banner, the Africa Corps. With this shift, Russia's involvement was no longer covert, but officially state-backed. Russian military trainers, equipment, and strategic support began flowing into the Sahel, with promises to deliver the security the West had failed to provide. In exchange, Russia gained significant influence, access to vital resources such as Niger's uranium, and a major foothold in African geopolitics. But the shift wasn't just about security. The AES leaders knew that political independence was incomplete without economic independence. At the heart of this effort is the CFA franc, a currency tied to the euro and guaranteed by France. Long criticized as a relic of colonial control, the alliance has openly discussed abandoning the CFA franc in favor of a new shared currency. In May 2025, they took a step toward that goal by announcing the creation of a Confederate Bank for Investment and Development, a potential foundation for a self-sustaining economic zone. Beyond Russia, the AES is actively cultivating ties with other non-Western powers. China is a natural choice for infrastructure projects, while Turkey and Iran have also been approached. The strategy is clear: diversify partnerships to avoid dependence on any single power bloc. It is, however, a high-stakes gamble. Russia's security model comes with a controversial human rights record, and moving away from established economic systems could trigger serious instability. But for the leaders and many citizens, these risks are worth taking in pursuit of what they view as genuine sovereignty. They are no longer waiting for a place at a table they believe was rigged against them. Instead, they are building their own table, inviting new partners, and setting new rules. This split from ECOWAS is not a minor political event. It is a turning point in African history. The departure of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger is the culmination of decades of frustration with a post-colonial order that promised equality but delivered control. For the AES, ECOWAS became the embodiment of everything they opposed: foreign dominance, ineffective governance, and a detachment from the everyday realities of their people. The geopolitical landscape of West Africa is now permanently altered. The region is no longer unified under one bloc, but divided between two competing visions. And the domino effect is real. Other nations may soon follow. ECOWAS faces a legitimacy crisis unless it can prove it serves its people rather than external powers. The question is not if more members will leave, but when. For the AES, the future remains uncertain. They face enormous challenges, from defeating persistent insurgencies to building functional economies, and their new alliances are far from risk-free. Yet for the first time in a long time, the path ahead is one they have chosen for themselves. Western influence in West Africa has not disappeared, but the era of a single, Western-backed consensus is over. A new, more fragmented, and unpredictable chapter has begun.